Hello, folks who are tuning in. Can you let me know if you can hear me? Hello, folks who are tuning in. Can you let me know? Okay, I can be heard because I just heard myself. Okay. So thank you everyone for tuning in. We're just having a little bit of technical difficulties, but of course we're not going to let that stop us today for this other next episode of You Ask, We Answers. I know some folks are probably still hanging out on the other tab. So while we get things situated, love for folks just to chime in the chat. Let us know where you're listening in from um, as we get ready to get started. All right. And so, for folks who don't know, my name is Michelle. I am with Women Engaged, and this is another episode of You Ask, We Answers, we being women engaged. And so, we are doing this work to make sure that we provide opportunities just like this to really get to know people more about the issues, more about the motivations that we have in terms of the work that we're doing. And so, I'm really excited to dig into today's topic. But before there, just giving an update that currently, we are in the midst of our issue-based campaign where we're doing outreach on a series of issues stemming from reparations as well as Medicaid expansion. And so if you're interested in joining in on those efforts, volunteering through phone banking or text messaging, feel free to sign up with us at www.womenengaged.org/join. So super excited again to have this day to be with you all in virtual space and community as we dig into today's conversation. Our conversation today is really going to start touching base on, Black women, our political advocacy and our leadership. And we felt like this would be a great time for us to have a conversation with our very own Mishara Davis. And so Mishara Davis is joining our team as our Vice President of Political and Civic Engagement. She grew up right here in Georgia, and her first found passion for social justice was as an organizer with the NAACP. She continued her activism at the University of Michigan and went on to organize voters for the 2016 presidential primaries in New Hampshire and Mississippi. She advocated for political building power in BIPOC communities across the country while working in Washington, D.C., and now resides in Metro Atlanta. Currently, she is earning her MPA at the Indiana University O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs and is a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and chairs the Political Action Committee. Please, go ahead and chime in the chat with some applause emojis for Mishara Davis.
Hello.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you
Hey,
so much for
Mishara.
having me. Hey, Michelle.
Hey, it's so great. I'm so excited for this
O'Neill School of
conversation
Public and
because we are just happy to have you all here, have you with us as we're growing in a team and just having an opportunity for folks to better know us, better know you, and also too, just like with your background, knowing more about the state of Black women leadership and political advocacy. So I guess I mentioned it a little bit in your bio, but would love for you to tell us a little bit more about, you know, the moment that did bring you into social justice work.
Absolutely. Well, once again, thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to jump into this juicy conversation. And, honestly, my passion for this work started in ninth grade in my civics class. I remember sitting in church in Douglasville, and at the time, State Representative, now State Senator, Donzilla James, she came and she spoke. And I remember her talking about, being engaged in the community and the importance of voting. And so I wanted to learn more. So I remember going up to her after service, asking if she can come and speak to my ninth grade class. And she's such a sweetheart. So she graciously agreed and she came and she spoke. And I remember after that, she sponsored me a 2-year membership in the NAACP. And so that's really how I got involved. And, not long after joining, I moved to Detroit with my mom, who was born and raised in the city of Detroit. So it's really a second home for me. I still have family there. And I have to just give a shout out to any fellow Cass Tech or University of Michigan alum who may be tuning in. But not long after moving to Detroit, I joined the Detroit branch NAACP and really just continued my advocacy. The branch is currently under the leadership of Camellia Landrum, who's a phenomenal leader. And when I think about my journey in civic engagement, I think about Black leaders, particularly Black women leaders, who have been so instrumental in my development as a social justice advocate. I think about Mama Joanne Watson, who's a former city councilwoman in the city of Detroit. I had the opportunity to volunteer on her campaign several times, knocking on doors and making sure folks are registered to vote and reminding them when to actually get out and vote. I'm thinking about Dr. Mama Sandra Simmons, who is brilliant. She and Dr. Charles Simmons are the creators behind the Hush House. If you are unfamiliar with the Hush House, I highly recommend you go and check them out online. It's really a Black history museum on the west side of Detroit over on Wabash. And it has a wealth of knowledge about Black history, the civil rights movement, Pan-Africanism. And so being involved is really what helped to build my village. I also think about one of my dear mentors and fellow sorority sisters, Dr. Mary Hall Thyman. I remember working with her in the Ann Arbor NAACP while at Michigan. And so the reason I lift up these strong Black women in leadership is because, like I said, they were so instrumental in my development as an advocate, and being involved at a young age is what really propelled my career and my interest in wanting to continue my advocacy over the last really 14 years. And so I'm very appreciative, very grateful for my journey. And I have a soft spot in my heart for youth engagement because I got involved so young. So there's so many opportunities for folks to get involved in this work.
Oh my goodness. Yes. First of all, I just appreciate you for really naming, okay, the folks in your life. I think that that is so powerful, and definitely relate on the youth engagement part, because that's too also how I felt, like how I got my start as well. And it is important, right, about how we continue to develop young people. I guess like wanted to dig a little bit more into that. I guess it's like what has sustained you, right? Like, so it's like becoming activated at like ninth grade, you're like 14, 15 years old. And so what has really sustained your engagement? Like, what are those issues that were really like, at that time you were like, this is what we need to change, you know, and look, I found out in civics that this is what we can do.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So, I mean, there really are so many issues, right? But I think about voting rights. And I think about, you know, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and its gutting and the 2013 Shelby v. Holder Supreme Court case, and how that really just opened the floodgates for so many suppressive voting rights bills across the country, and especially here in Georgia. I also think about, you know, racial equity and just the willful blindness of racism and white supremacy and how that's not okay. You know, I recently watched a lecture by Spelman professor, Dr. Beverly Guy Sheftall, and she talked about you know, us as a country really needing to examine the intersectionalities of race, of class, of gender, and really have a serious conversation about the inequities that exist within community. And so for me, that would be a win in terms of moving the work forward. I also think about healthcare, and so how the access to affordable healthcare should really be a right. And like, to be more specific, when I think about reproductive justice, having bodily autonomy, right? Having the right to choose and have affordable child healthcare, it's just very, very important for me. And so, you know, being a young person in this work, and I like to still consider myself young, just being involved, being engaged in community, hearing the issues that are important to folks within my community is really what's kept me grounded and reminds me of why I'm in this work and why I continue to fight for justice and for equity.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I definitely feel you on that. You know, sometimes I've noticed with folks, like there sometimes is a disconnect, right, from like our everyday lives and like what's going on in the political arena. I know I have a number of family members who are, I would consider apolitical, or folks who are just necessarily not as eager to get engaged, right? I guess like what do you tell folks when it comes to like really connecting these things to our everyday lives?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, really just going back to the importance of civic engagement, right? So, obviously voting, making sure that we're exercising our franchise, but also taking it a step further and by participating. So, holding our electeds accountable and really encouraging young people to get involved, right? And so, when we think about student loans, which I'm sure, there's millions of folks who are, in debt from student loans. And so, thinking about who we have in office, who have a direct impact on the policies that are being passed, have a direct correlation to your student loan payments, right? And so, being involved, civic engagement, it has a direct impact on our everyday life. And so on a personal level, I think it's so important. Like just, I keep emphasizing youth engagement because the youth, this generation, Gen Z, they are the next leaders. They are current leaders in their own right. And so I think by, having young folks really lift up their voices and be innovative is a way to really honestly encourage people to get involved.
Yes. Oh my goodness. And then like, yes, all of that. And then I'm thinking too as well, like we're talking about, the ways in which Black women and girls have been very pivotal in the success stories of voting and voting rights and in the push for progress. And, we just came out of the 2020 election cycle where Black women, were, visibly being talked about and celebrated for our work in this arena. I guess it's like, what are your thoughts in terms of like now, holding people accountable to our needs? Because sometimes there seems to be, at least to me, a disconnect in how society shows up for the needs of Black women, whereas opposed we're having, we're showing up not only for everyone else, but really for ourselves, right? When we start talking about voter turnout. So I would love just to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. So I think organizations like Women Engaged, like BYP 100, Black Women's Roundtable, Sister Song, I mean, the list goes on, right? And these organizations are really centering the needs of Black women. So I think what we have to do as a community and as civic engagement organizations is to continue being vocal, right, on the issues, continue being present and educating both elected officials, but also allies on the issues that are important for Black women, the importance of the intersectionality, and that when Black women win, we all win. And it's important that as we're standing up for different communities, that we remember to always stand up for Black women because we're always standing up for other communities and other issues. So stand with Black women.
Yes. No, I appreciate that. Definitely a stand with Black women. I think too, it's like really also telling people too, like, because at least for me, it's like I'll tell people like, hey, you need to stand with Black women, and then when they do, it's not at all what we needed. Like you know what I'm saying? Like I guess it's like how do we begin to tell people what it means to really stand with Black women? Because sometimes people hear that, and I feel like there's some savior complexes that come involved, some paternalism that happens. Like, I guess like what would you say to people to like when it gets down to nitty gritty, like for those who are listening, like what does it really mean to stand up for Black women?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, listening to Black women, listening to our lived experiences, right? Not making assumptions, asking questions, and sometimes really just taking a step back to really allow space, right? Allow space for Black women to lead. Whether that's within civic engagement organizations, within community, but I would say I really want to hone in on listen to Black women, and also recognize too that Black women, we're not a monolith. And so, we come in so many different size, shapes, and colors, and we all add our own little special spice. And it's important to recognize, the differences and the beauty within that.
Yes. I mean, because it is very beautiful and like the rich diversity that is within like Black womanhood and Black films and like the intersections of all of those identities. And I definitely agree. It's worth celebrating, right? It's worth celebrating and honoring and respecting and centering all of those experiences. And to your point, not treating it like it's a monolith, right? So I guess it's like, I love trying to think into the future, right? Like I personally am an Afrofuturist. Like it's something that gives me hope. It's something that we can think about. I guess it's like as we start thinking about, now as we're moving forward, how do we start visualizing a win? Like what to you, what does a win look like really for Black women and girls?
Yes, yes. I think about Medicaid expansion, right? I think, and which has yet to happen here in Georgia. When we talk about reproductive justice, having the right to choose and, having the ability to say, how you want to be treated, I think is so important. And really going back to listening to Black women. So if I'm telling you, right, my beliefs and how I want, to be treated, how I want to show up in space, respect that.
Yes, I definitely hear you that because it's like listen to Black women, but what I'm also hearing there is that people need to believe Black women, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I find out like especially like as we're on the we're about a week or so out from the murder of Ma'Khia Bryant,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that the idea of really believing Black women and girls when we tell you about situations where we're unsafe, I feel like it's really where we're kind of getting at, right? And that a win sometimes is that like, there's the big wins, of course, like moving really great legislation like Medicaid expansion, which, I feel like we sound like broken records after a while because it's been like how many years in
Long.
Georgia, right? That we've been asking for Medicaid expansion, but also too, like it starts personally, right? Like listening to the needs of our communities and really does. So I really appreciate you for like bringing that in because I think definitely on that listening part, and that's why we're having this space too. And so I guess it's like now, you know, as we're moving out of 2020, we had these record numbers. What do you think the landscape looks like for us as Black women in our political advocacy going forward?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, when I think about 2020, I think about so many Black women leaders that come to mind. Like I'm thinking Stacey Abrams, Latasha Brown, Malika Redmond, Melanie Campbell, Helen Butler, Tamika Atkins, like the list goes on and on and on. And Black women, we've always been on the scene. We've always been organizing for years. So 2020 was not coincidental, but it also didn't happen overnight, right? And so it's really been years of sustained engagement. And so when I look at the landscape, I really see a shift in our electorate. Where voters are wanting to vote in the direction of change. And so I think Georgia was a prime example, especially with the 2021 runoff, right? The Senate runoff. And so I think that Black-led civic engagement organizations have a unique opportunity right now to activate even more voters. And especially when we think about this political backlash, given the historic voter turnout, from the 2020 election, here in Georgia, there were over 40 anti-voting bills introduced in the legislature. When we talk about the verdict in the Chauvin trial, now provided it was certainly a step in the right direction for justice and change, but we still need police reform. I'm thinking about the pandemic and how it has disproportionately impacted communities of color. So I think as community, particularly BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous people of color, we're at a point where we're just honestly fatigued, right? I think we're just fatigued with the continual attack on our basic human rights, and just to live and to be free. So that's why I think right now, when I look at the landscape, there's this increased desire of wanting to hold electeds accountable. And when I look at, as we move forward over these next several years, I think that's an energy that's going to continue to happen, which is also where organizations come into play, right? When we talk about integrated voter engagement, making sure that folks are engaged year round, because, coming out of the election, honestly, voters, they were tired of our texts and our calls. And, I know some folks were out there on doors, women engaged. We had like fully, virtual work given the pandemic. And so making sure that we're continuing that interest over the next several years, I think is going to be so important.
Oh my goodness. Yes to all of that. Like, I don't even know where to begin. I think, like, definitely uplifting the fact that, like, the voter fatigue that people were experiencing going into 2020, especially for Georgians. I mean,
Yes.
and the runoffs and everything that was happening, because it was basically like a marathon where,
Mm-hmm.
at least for especially those last maybe 4 or 5 months out of the year, was really just hitting hard for Georgians. And then I think coupling that too with what you mentioned around just the general fatigue that us as Black people are facing in terms of like it's like an emotional roller coaster every day, more news. I know for myself personally, I've had to unplug myself a bit for my own mental health. And so I guess it's like, for folks like too, also, I want to highlight that like for a lot of folks over the past year, this is the first time that they've really become politically active, right? Or like politically engaged, like this has been their moment, right? Coming into this work. But I know sometimes the work can seem overwhelming, right? It's like, hey, you're coming into this work, here's all this kind of stuff. So I guess it's like, what would you tell people now who are just now entering this work, like what they should do, like some best practices as they start to get engaged with everything that is going on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a couple of things. One, I would say, knowing our history, right? I think it's so important to know where you came from in order to know where you're going to have a good compass. And then I also say ground yourself in the work. So understanding, for example, here at Women Engaged, we sit at the intersections of reproductive justice and integrated voter engagement, but what makes us different is that we're doing this work through a Black feminist lens, right? So understanding what are the issues of community. And that's what I mean when I say grounding ourselves in the work. And then also balance is so important. Like when I think about, being in this pandemic and we're working from home, it's so easy to, wake up in the morning, you're on your computer for work, and then you're on your computer again, maybe for like an evening get together or whatnot. And so having some type of balance, I think, is really important because it's so easy, like I said, for things just to kind of run together and for us to almost lose focus of while we're in the work. And so a constant reminder of why we're in this work, I think, is what keeps me going.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that so much because again, that balance, right? Especially like coming out of such an intense time around 2020 where people were kind of like in overdrive and now
Mm-hmm.
really again trying to figure out that balance. Um, I also am curious to what you would tell the folks. So, especially with the prior administration, there was a hyper focus of being politically engaged, and now definitely noticing that like people are not necessarily seeing the need to be as like aware, right? I guess like what would you tell folks now in terms of like why it's important to stay engaged, especially with the things that are going on?
Yeah, I mean, well, first and foremost, your voice, it really does matter. When you look at how close elections are, if everyone had the same thought of, well, I'm just not going to vote because, I don't think it really matters. If 500,000 people said that, right? And honestly, not even 500,000. Honestly, if 1,000 people said that, it can seriously change the game and change the direction of an election. And so remembering that your voice is important, remembering that people have literally fought, died, and bled for the right to vote, right? And so recognizing and honoring those who came before us, and then also having a voice in your community, really as a leader, as a youth leader, right? I think about young people and them sitting in their power as someone who can encourage and motivate their friends to get out and vote. So recognize that we see you in your community making a change, and just continue to have that spirit.
Yes, I like this. I like this so much about like continuing to stay engaged in community and really building that because there really is a need for some collective power building,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think too, it's like in this conversation, like how do we begin to bring in now our legislators into those kind of community building conversations, and really, I guess like what are some of your tips to folks right now in terms to holding their legislators accountable?
Yeah. Well, first, just understanding the issues, right? So I would say seeking education, and there are plenty of opportunities and resources to do that. And then also inviting your legislators to come and speak at maybe your neighborhood association meeting at your church, right? Coming to speak at your school, to hear what's happening in the legislature, but then also engaging with organizations who are already doing research on the work. For example, I think about at Women Engage, how we held our soapbox event last month, where we were able to really uplift the voices of community to highlight how they're feeling about the different bills that are being passed. And so I think one, educating ourselves on the issues, two, being able to connecting with elected officials so that way they can come and speak to community, to making sure that we are actually holding them accountable to what they said they're going to do.
Yes, I love this idea of like again the education and inviting them into our spaces because I feel like oftentimes, and you can tell me if you notice this too, is that like it seems like it's the other way around where people feel like we have to go into their spaces. But I feel like what I'm hearing there is that it should be on our own terms, right? Like, hey, this is what we want, and you need to come into our space and tell us, than necessarily feeling the need to, be suited and booted to go to the Capitol necessarily, because the Capitol's not always the most accessible place,
It's not. I will say this. I think we should do both, right? I think, certainly going as a collective, there's power in individual and collective activism. And so I definitely think, going to the Capitol, I think right now in the pandemic, we want to make sure that we are, being safe. In communities. And so calling your elected officials, texting them, hashtagging them on social media to let them know that we are watching them in regards to how they are uplifting the issues that are important for community.
Yes, I appreciate that. Like a double approach on this aspect of really holding people accountable and doing this. And so, like I'm curious too, like, in terms of like, I know you mentioned like in your bio, it mentions that you've had the political action committee with Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And so curious to know, like, what would you tell folks in terms of like, if they're trying to do their own political actions, like where do they start?
Oh, that's a great question. So I've had the honor and opportunity to serve as the connection chair, which is our political action arm for my chapter, and it's been an amazing experience being able to connect with community leaders. And so honestly, I would say that's the first step, right? In terms of just getting involved, whether it's through volunteering or what have you, an internship or fellowship. So there are organizations that are out here that are that have been doing this work for years, and so don't feel lost and don't feel alone when you are wanting to start out on this journey of being politically and civically engaged. I would say reach out to an organization, let them know, hey, I'm interested in volunteering. Learn how to create an event around a candidate forum, or learn how to conduct different political engagement activities, and then start your own organization or start your own initiative.
I love that. Yeah, this is where I'm going to insert my shameless plug for people to sign up at womenengage.org/join. If you're looking for that political home, we've hosted candidate forums. We can provide that type of development and provide you what Mishara is describing here as like a political home, right? Like just find this place where you can be in community and start building those structures. So no, I appreciate that. And it gave you the opportunity, of course, to tell people where to sign up.
Of
And
course.
so these are really, I feel like, amazing ideas. And thank you, Malika. Malika was like, yes, get him on Twitter. Okay. Alexia said, great advice. Yes. Oh my goodness. For my folks who are tuning in, if you all have any questions or any thoughts, please feel free to chime them into the chat. We're always open to, asking these questions live. I'm keeping track on the comments. So again, we would love to hear from you all too. And so love to get your thoughts. Like we're coming in on the hour, and to your point earlier, it's been a whirlwind of a year, a year and a half. Like I feel like it's been forever at this point in terms of like the ways in which we've changed our lives and stuff like that. This can be something that has resonated with you in terms of political advocacy or just you know in general. But like, what is something that's really been resonating with you that you really feel like folks need to know right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're in a global pandemic, right? Unfortunately, some people have lost their jobs. People are having a hard time, paying mortgages, paying rent. And so, honestly, right now, love on one another, right? Especially our young people. I'm thinking between the pandemic and what's going on with George Floyd and so many others that we've lost, there hasn't really been an opportunity to mourn, right? I feel like it's back to back. And so really loving on your neighbors, loving on your community and on your village, I think is so important right now, which leads me to my other point, just around relationship building. I think that's one way we, understand the needs of community, and I really mean like building genuine, authentic relationships with folks in community, with our loved ones, right? And so I think that's just so very important, and it reminds me of like what it means to meet people where they are, right? It starts by building that trust with people.
Yes. No, I really appreciate that because it's like, for one, we're very we're social people. Like people are social people. Like that. Like regardless of how introverted we are, I know personally I consider myself an introvert, but like at the end of the day, it's like we're a social people, and to your point, really enriching ourselves with that intentional relationship building and community care. And I feel like in another conversation, this might have been a few weeks ago, we were talking about this too, because in light of um, the actions that have been taken around SB 202 and like the businesses and stuff like that, and like how this is really a time for communities to reach in and like patron Black owned businesses and stuff like that. I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit more about, I guess, that need about like that community care aspect.
Absolutely. Yes, I am certainly an advocate for supporting Black owned, and there are so many Black owned, restaurants and stores and shops right here in Atlanta. And I think that's honestly one way of loving on our community, right? And so, when you go out to eat or if you're going shopping, look and see if there's a Black owned business in your area, and making sure that we're recycling dollars within our community.
Yes, I appreciate that, especially here in Atlanta, Georgia, like in the Atlanta metro area. It's so rich with that kind of information, and I like how we're tying this back into community care as well, because it's like it's an extension, knowing that like this community care starts from the personal, of course, being able to cultivate these relationships, our dollars as well, right? But then also too, like the power of our political advocacy and vote. I feel like it ties right back in to that accountability aspect, right? Because it's like accountability is brought on by the care, right? It's like you have to care to be held accountable. So I really appreciate that. And oh my goodness, I love this, Malika. Malika's like, let we be your political home.
Yes, come to we.
And she said that it reminds her of what she states about Bell Hook's State of Love, and that how love is what motivates our political movements. Like it's the love for ourselves, our people, and our communities.
Yes, it's what keeps us going.
Right. I'm just here for it. Oh my goodness. And so I have a question from the chat. For people who are feeling a little disconnected from their communities during the pandemic, what are some ways to engage and invest safely?
Yes, I love that. Well, honestly, we're on Zoom right now. We're on Facebook Live. And so I would say connecting with family, with friends, with community in virtual settings, right? And so, I know there's some fatigue around this virtual space, but it is one way that we're able to connect with one another in a safe manner, right? There have been so many different events on, I think about the Instagram Live and the verses, right? So have a little a virtual get together with your friends and watch verses. So, and there's so many different ways to engage with one another. And I know that it's difficult right now because folks have not been able to see their family or see their friends in person. And I can definitely relate to that. And so that's why I'm so happy to be back here, back home in Georgia. And even some of my family members who are here, some of my older family members who live in the area, I'm still seeing them in a virtual manner, right? Because we really want to make sure that we're practicing that social distancing and being safe with one another. So I would say, connect with them and say, hey, let's do a virtual get together. Let's have a virtual game night. And have some fun.
I'm always here for a virtual game night. Hey, look, I'm always here for a virtual game night. And I think it's definitely important. It's like, to your point, is that like, in the midst of this, there's so many ways to connect. And that even though, people are feeling a little bit fatigued, we can become really innovative with it. Like, I tell people all the time, I'm a millennial baby. This is what we used to do growing up, okay? Like the chat rooms, the ways in which we all would connect, and that it's kind of like a relearning of that, right? Mm-hmm. And continuing to like deeply invest. And I appreciate you for lifting up the fact that, we're right here on Facebook Live. And, our teams have been doing this work remotely for a little bit over a year now, and that, what I think is really important to highlight here too is that like our communities are resilient, right? Like in the face of like the issues and stuff like that, like we still find ways to develop and create connections and invest in ourselves. And so I just feel like I wanted to really uplift that as well. And so thank you for asking that question.
Yes. And actually, and I want to say too, one thing that I really appreciate about women engaged is that, during the onset of the pandemic, as we've been connecting with voters and making sure they're registered to vote and informing them about our issue advocacy campaign, we're connecting with them first and foremost, just on a human level, right? Recognizing that people are going through challenging times right now. And so asking, do you need support with what type of resources can we put you in connection with, right? And then I feel like once we create, we have that initial touch, right, of building that relationship with voters, then coming back and asking them, are you registered to vote? And as a reminder, the election's on this day, right? So that relationship building, I think, is something we can still do in this virtual space.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I think that, especially to your point, being able to ask people those questions, especially in the midst of a pandemic, is just so important because it's hard to be engaged like politically when you have so many things personally affecting you. When you have to ask questions about like bills and utilities and stuff like that. So I just appreciate you for lifting that up, and also just the we perspective of honoring people as whole people, right?
Yes.
Like, especially because like I feel like, and this is my own critique of society, is that like hustle culture sometimes will make people like think that you have to always be on this kind of like go 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 thing, but really, what I'm hearing there is like really understanding the humanity, right?
Yes. Yes.
And
Can we just
so
get the snaps to that?
snaps. Okay. And so that kind of brings you to this next point too, because it's like, I always like to towards the end, I always have a part about self-care. One, because even as leaders in this movement, people need to understand that we're human. Like, but also too, that self-care is important. And it's like it's through self-care, love, and joy that we find sustainability in this work. So I guess like, what are some things that you're practicing right now that is bringing you joy?
Yes, I love that question. So in Georgia, there are so many trails down here. And so I am absolutely loving these trails. I love to bike. So I found a couple that are not my favorites. I'm outside biking, typically like later in the day. It's beautiful out. Also, just spending time with family, right? And so I think about my youngest niece. She's 4, and she's my little shadow. And I just absolutely love just seeing her and my other nieces and nephews just run around and calling me auntie, like, can we go here? Can we do this? Of course, in a safe fashion, given the pandemic and what have you. But spending quality time with my family members, also spending time with my sorority sisters. I'm just so grateful for, like I said, for my village and just being able to love on one another. Honestly, it just really gives me that energy to refuel and to be able to come to the work refreshed.
Oh my goodness. I love all of that. First of all, I love the little ones. Little ones just bring me so much joy. And then, I mean, I'm a little bit jelly, I'm not going to lie, because I don't know how to ride a bike, but I do like a good trail. So,
Yes.
like, oh my goodness. And so I really appreciate you uplifting that too, that just sometimes being able to just be in community and just have joy with other people is just so important, right? And like in rejuvenating ourselves and really doing this kind of stuff. And so I guess like looking forward now, like what are some things that you're looking forward to, right? Like as we move past now the Georgia legislative session
Yes.
and like this election cycle, some things that we're looking forward to into this new year.
Absolutely. So I'm looking forward to a lot. I'm looking forward to the passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I'm also looking forward to this conversation around redistricting. It's a juicy topic right now, and there are a lot of organizations out there that are providing information, just educating people on the importance of redistricting, what it means, how you can get involved. I know the Georgia Redistricting Alliance has some great information on their site. And so I'm really excited about what that's going to look like for our communities. And just a sneak peek, we will be talking about it soon on one of our You Ask Me Answer series. So I'm really excited about that conversation.
I am too. I am too. Thank you. And thank you, Alexia. And yes, so I'm sorry, I really don't know how to ride a bike. But like
we need to make that like a we thing so we can
right, like
we'll
look,
make it
I mean, I'm always open to it. It's on my bucket list. But you mentioned something there that I think like we haven't necessarily touched on the show yet. It's the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I was wondering if you could just give a little bit more information about that for folks who are tuning in who may not be familiar with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mentioned that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and its gutting and the 2013 Shelby v. Holder case, Supreme Court case. And so by removing Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, it opened the floodgates for so many voter suppressive bills across the country. And so this John Lewis Voting Rights Act really is to help strengthen the original Voting Rights Act of 65. And so there's been, lots of discussion about it in Congress. A lot of back and forth as well. And so, I'm hoping that we see some progressive movement on it very soon. We definitely need to make sure that we are protecting voting rights because your voice matters. And so that's definitely going to be something that's going to help, particularly communities of color and BIPOC communities when it comes to voting and voting rights access.
Yes, thank you for uplifting that because it's like something that I was like, wait, they may not, folks may not know because it's like Section 5. What was it, Section 5 or Section 2?
Section 5, yeah.
The pre-clearance clause, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think the common theme of this thing, and for folks who are listening, this is why it's so important to be engaged because without that pre-clearance, which used to mean that like if they were going to come up with new rules, it would go to the federal level and they would then be able to shoot it down or not before it was enacted to law. Now this is why we have like this explosion of voter suppression bills everywhere. And that's why you have these groups who like us and others who are like, hold up, right?
Yes. Like, wait a minute.
Hey, wait a minute, what are we doing here? And so no, thank you for uplifting that because I was like, wait. Oh my goodness. And so I think that definitely to that point, and yes, the sneak peek on redistricting, y'all. And so I didn't know if you could tell folks just a little bit of an overview about redistricting too. I know, well, it's going to be another episode of USB Answers where actually Mishara will be hosting that episode. So, but just to give people a little bit of insight on redistricting and the things that that entails.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a nutshell, redistricting is really all about drawing the electoral boundary, drawing the electoral districts, right? And so we want to make sure that there's equity in drawing these districts. And so there's a conversation about what does that look like, right? Who's going to be in charge of really moving this work forward? And so there's a lot of conversation on both the state and national level with organizations identifying how folks can be part of that conversation and make sure that we have not only a seat at the table, but teeth in decision making when it comes to redrawing these lines.
Yes, thank you so much for that overview. So just so you guys heard it, we're going to have another episode of You Ask Me Answers and be able to really dig in deeper about what this means and what it has meant and what it could mean in the future, right? There's so many things around redistricting. So I really appreciate you for bringing that up because yes, all of these things are interconnected too as we start looking at the positionality of Black women and girls. And so, oh, hello, little fur friend.
Of course, working from home, she decides to jump on my lap.
It's all good. I mean, my little fur friend, he's down here hanging out. He's asleep right now. But before we close it out, we Women Engage, we have a collaborative playlist. And so for folks who are tuning in, we have this playlist that was born out of our work last year, some jams to kind of kick up your activism and political advocacy. And so just wanted to know, what is your song right now that you want to help close out the day that's bringing you joy and, just jamming out?
Yes, I love this question. And I love this song, Brown Skin Girl by Beyonce. I think it's so fitting for this event. And I absolutely love it. We come in all different shades and, like I said, sizes, shapes, and colors. And so I think it's important to just really value Black women, stand with Black women, and stand with the brown skin girls.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. So y'all heard it here, okay? The song of the day is Brown Skin Girl. Okay, so before we close it out, I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to share to folks today. Yes.
So if you don't take anything away from this session, I hope the one thing you take away is to get involved, whether it's with Women Engaged or another organization within your community. And one of the benefits of, if there is a benefit, right, of this pandemic is that you're able to get involved with any organization across the country because there's so many virtual opportunities, right? So get involved, know that your voice matters. Make sure you're calling your friends and your family members to make sure that they are registered to vote and they know about the upcoming elections because your voice and your vote is powerful. So thank you all so much for joining.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Mishara, for all of that. So you all just heard it here. Go ahead and sign up at womenengage.org/join and tune in next week for our episode. We're actually shifting our days. So we will be tuning in on Thursdays now at noon. So make sure to keep an eye out for that. We're super excited for the topics that are coming out at hand. You guys have already heard redistricting, and we have others. If you have any suggestions or want things that you want featured on the show, make sure to comment those down below as well. But as always, make sure that you get engaged, find yourself a political home, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you all next week. Have a good one, y'all.
Thanks. Bye.